Do you believe people can really change? Or do they just get better at hiding things?
My little brother called me a loser and told me not to show up for Christmas. So I didn't. And neither did his rent. Or his utilities. Or his next tuition payment. I didn't scream. I didn't throw a tantrum. I didn't send back a long, bitter reply or try to defend myself with a list of receipts from the last decade of my life. No. I just sat there, on the edge of my bed, with my phone still glowing in my hand, and felt something unfamiliar rise in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger, but this dull, eerie silence. Like something inside me had finally gone still after years of trying to be heard and constantly being ignored. Let me tell you something that'll probably piss a few people off. Sometimes, family is the biggest con job in your life. Sometimes, it's the people you've bled for who are the first to slit your throat when it's convenient. Zach wasn't just my little brother. After our parents died, Mom from breast cancer when he was 17, and Dad just 3 years later from a sudden heart attack, I was the only person left in his world who gave a damn. I was 30 then, working full-time as a dental office manager, barely making ends meet myself. I didn't have kids. I didn't have a husband. I had a mortgage, a rescue dog named Mabel, and a bank account that lived paycheck to paycheck. And still, I opened up my savings and covered his first semester at college. I helped him get a used car so he didn't have to walk to class in the snow. When he moved into an apartment his sophomore year and couldn't find a roommate, I picked up the slack. It wasn't some heroic sacrifice. It was instinct. That's what older siblings do when life rips the floor out from under you. At first, he was grateful. I remember his texts from that first year. Love you, Kel. Don't know what I'd do without you. That kind of thing. But time has a funny way of making people forget. And comfort? Comfort makes people entitled. Zach got used to the money. Used to the monthly rent transfers. Used to the tuition checks clearing. Used to the way I dropped everything to help, even when I had my own bills, my own stress, my own damn life to carry. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being his sister and started being his sponsor. Last year at Thanksgiving, it started to really show. He brought his new fiancée, Ashley, a 20-something with a yoga influencer Instagram and a habit of ending every sentence like it was a question. She called me Karen twice to my face, then laughed and said it was a joke. Zach chuckled along like I was part of some inside family sitcom. Over dinner, she made a comment about people who never really lived, glancing at me across the table with her fake eyelashes and her smug little smile. And Zach? He just poured her another glass of wine and said, Kelly's too responsible for her own good. Like I was some neutered cautionary tale in their rom-com. I didn't say a word that night. I just smiled, cleared the plates, and handed Zach a fresh envelope with a rent check inside. Then came the text. December 20th. A Monday morning. I had just confirmed my flight to fly down to Atlanta for Christmas, booked a rental car, and even bought a couple of gifts, nothing fancy, just stuff I knew Zach would need, a new winter coat, some noise-canceling headphones for his online classes. The text came through as I was eating breakfast. It was one line, not even punctuated. Don't bother coming this year, we don't need losers ruining the holiday. I stared at it. Thought it was a joke. Waited for the follow-up. But none came. Just the 3 dots that danced for a few seconds and then disappeared. That was it. I waited another minute. Then another 5. I scrolled up the conversation to make sure I didn't miss anything. Nope. That was the message. And something inside me just snapped. But not in the way people think. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't cry. I didn't even text back. I just sat there, quiet, sipping my coffee while Mabel curled up at my feet and slowly opened my banking app. I scrolled down to the scheduled transfers. Rent payment for December 20th. Tuition installment for spring semester. Electricity and water bills, all set up to auto-pay through my account because Zach had never been good with paperwork. One by one, I canceled them all. It took less than 3 minutes. Then I opened my email, pulled up the airline confirmation, and clicked Cancel Flight. I didn't even bother checking for a refund. I didn't care. Now here's a question for you, because I know some of you are already judging me. What's worse, Cutting someone off without warning, or watching them drain you dry for years while they smile to your face and mock you behind your back. You tell me. See, people like Zach think kindness is infinite. They think being needed makes you stupid. They think because you never said no before, you never will. But that morning, I realized I wasn't being kind. I was being used. And I was done. You want to know the real kicker? After I canceled the payments, I didn't even feel triumphant. I felt quiet. Just this strange, empty quiet, like stepping out of a house that's been on fire for years and realizing the smoke smell had sunk into your skin. For the first time in over a decade, I wasn't worried about Zach. And for the first time in over a decade, he had absolutely no idea how much he needed me. He thought I was the family doormat. He forgot who paid the goddamn bills. And oh, he was about to find out. The thing no one ever tells you about being the dependable one in the family is that it doesn't come with applause, or medals, or thank you cards signed in shaky cursive and tucked in thoughtful envelopes. What it comes with, more often than not, is silence. Expectation and, eventually, resentment from the very people who lean on you the hardest and then call you bitter when you start to break. I don't know exactly when I stopped being Zach's sister and started being his second mother, but I know it happened somewhere in the blur of funeral flowers and mortgage papers. Right after Mom passed and Dad crumbled into a shell of a man who died 3 years later with his hands trembling and a pack of unopened bills on the kitchen counter. I was 30 years old when I inherited everything and nothing all at once. A teenager with too many dreams and no structure, a house with a leaking roof, a car that coughed like a smoker, and a life I hadn't had the time to build for myself because I'd been too busy trying to hold everyone else together. Zach was 17 then, a baby in the body of a boy who thought pain made him an adult and that being sad was the same as being deep. He cried at Mom's service, but by the time we got home, he was already asking about money, how much we had, if he could still go to college, what would happen to his room. I remember standing in the hallway, holding a glass of water I forgot to drink, and thinking, this is what the rest of my life looks like. It's not getting married, not building a dream business, not even traveling to Italy like I promised myself once in a journal I hadn't opened in 5 years. It's keeping the lights on, keeping the food stocked, making sure this boy grows into a man who doesn't hate the world for taking his mother too soon. And for a while, that belief gave me purpose. Paying for his first semester of college, helping him find an apartment near campus, wiring rent every month because he said the landlord only took checks and didn't do online banking. Those things made me feel like I was doing what Mom would have done if she were still alive. But things shift. Slowly, quietly, and then all at once. Gratitude fades into assumption, and assumption calcifies into entitlement. Zach started skipping his classes, but still expected the tuition to be covered without question. He said things like, "You're good at this stuff," when I offered to help him budget, as if I was an employee and not a sister. I remember once he called to ask for an extra $200 for a textbook emergency, and I sent it without thinking, only to find out weeks later he'd used it for a weekend trip to Nashville with his friends. When I confronted him, he laughed and said, "Relax, Kel, it's not like you're poor." And that sentence sat with me like a stain I couldn't scrub out. I wasn't poor, no, but I wasn't rich either. I was managing. Carefully. Constantly. And mostly alone. The worst part is that no one in the family saw it. Aunt Linda always said Zach was so full of potential, that he was sensitive and artistic and needed the right environment to flourish, and in her eyes, I was the rigid older sister who didn't understand how dreams worked. She called me a caretaker personality, like it was a flaw, something tragic about the way I kept showing up. I guess it was. Because I kept giving. I kept sending those checks. I kept letting him pretend he was self-made, while I quietly filled in every blank space his life depended on. Even after he got engaged to Ashley, this sun-bleached girl who thought personal growth was buying better crystals, I still played the part. I didn't want to make waves. I thought maybe, just maybe, once they settled into a life together, he'd finally see how much I'd done, and he'd say thank you. But instead, he called me a loser. And in that moment, something in me crystallized. It wasn't rage. Rage is fast, it burns out. This was slower, colder, something more surgical. I decided to remove myself, not in theory, not emotionally, but literally. One by one, I unraveled every thread that tied me to his life. I logged into the shared utility account and took myself off as the billing contact, forcing the responsibility onto him without notice. I canceled the rent payment for his apartment, and I didn't warn him. I opened up the college's payment portal and withdrew my banking information. He'd already registered for spring courses, assuming I'd cover the balance, but that was no longer my concern. I didn't delete the accounts. I left them open, empty, like a silent monument to all the things he used to have access to. If he logged in, he'd see the void. And if he didn't? Well, that would tell its own story. Aunt Linda called 2 days later, voice dripping in that performative concern that always made me want to pull the phone away from my ear. Zach says there's some sort of mix-up with the rent, she said. He's really stressed, Kelly. You know he doesn't do well with pressure. I almost laughed. I wanted to say, neither do I, but I didn't. I just told her that I was no longer managing his accounts and that if Zach was old enough to get married, he was old enough to figure out how to keep the lights on. She tried guilt. She said things like, but you've always been there for him, and he's still your little brother, and my personal favorite, don't let a single text ruin years of love. But it wasn't just a text. It was the final brick in a wall I'd been too blind to see forming, built out of years of silent resentment, casual insults, ignored effort, and the quiet, slow erosion of basic human decency. The revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fire and fury. It was cold, exact, and entirely earned. And it wasn't even about hurting him. It was about stopping the hurt in me. About finally deciding that being needed isn't the same thing as being valued. Zach had built his adult life on a foundation of me, my time, my money, my stability, and the moment he thought he didn't need me, he spit on it. So I did the only thing that made sense. I walked away. And as I watched the dominoes begin to fall from the safe, detached distance of my own quiet apartment, I didn't feel joy. I felt something far more dangerous. I felt peace. Because when someone tells you not to show up, you don't argue. You let them find out what it means when you actually listen. There is a specific kind of silence that settles in your bones after you've made a decision you can't walk back, a quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from the sudden absence of noise. Like a television that's been humming in the background for so long you forgot it was even on, and the moment you turn it off, you're hit with the weight of stillness so dense, it feels like it might crush you if you breathe too deeply. That's what the days after cutting Zach off felt like. Not vindication, not relief, but a strange, hollow kind of calm, as if the emotional part of me had gone into hibernation, leaving only the logistics of my life to play out like clockwork. I woke up, walked to Mabel, went to work, made dinner, paid my own bills, folded my laundry. And all the while, I waited, not because I wanted to be begged, or chased, or even acknowledged, but because I knew, with an almost surgical certainty, that the unraveling had already begun. I didn't need to push. Gravity would do the rest. Zach had never lived in a world that didn't catch him when he fell. He had never written a check, never stayed on the phone with a utility company long enough to get a disconnection notice reversed, never learned how to appeal a financial hold at college or how to read a lease agreement without calling me to translate. He floated through adulthood with the reckless confidence of someone who believed consequences were for other people, and now, without me propping him up behind the curtain, he was about to find out what free fall really felt like. The first sign came quietly, as they often do, through the grapevine of distant relatives and mutual friends who thought they were just passing along news and didn't realize they were unknowingly narrating the opening chapters of his spiral. A former college friend of Zach's, someone I hadn't seen in years, but still had as a connection on an old social platform, messaged me to say he'd seen Zach post a vague story about people switching up and not everyone is family just because you share blood. I didn't respond. I didn't react. I just watched, passively, like you watch a campfire from across the clearing, aware of the danger, but confident it's contained, at least for now. Then came the real cracks. The rent went unpaid by the first of the month. The landlord, some management company I'd set up auto-pay with years ago, sent a past due notice to the email still tied to my account, which I hadn't gotten around to removing yet. I forwarded it to Zach without a word. That same day, I saw Ashley, his ever-optimistic, gemstone-collecting fiancé, had removed future wife from her online bios and posted a string of passive-aggressive captions about learning who's really there for you when things fall apart. I didn't reach out to either of them. I simply continued with my day, cooked dinner, took a hot shower, finished a book I'd been meaning to read for years, but never had the bandwidth to focus on because I'd always been too preoccupied worrying about someone else's problems. By the second week of January, his utilities had been disconnected. The electric company, which had also been tied to my account, left a voicemail on my personal number, informing me that the billing responsibility had defaulted back to the resident, and due to non-payment, service would be suspended until resolved. I saved the voicemail but didn't reply. 2 days later, a friend from college messaged me out of nowhere asking if everything was okay with Zach, because he'd apparently dropped all his classes, citing family emergencies, and was trying to get late withdrawal approvals. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I just said I wasn't involved anymore. And it was the truth. You see, the revenge wasn't in watching him suffer, it wasn't in taking pleasure from his downfall or gloating about his misfortunes, it was in the terrifying, sobering realization that he never even saw me as real. That my money, my time, my sacrifices, were background noise to him, the way some people don't notice the light bulb until it goes out. He had never considered the possibility that I might walk away, not because I was petty or vindictive, but because I was done. Utterly, completely, spiritually done. People around us, family, old friends, nosy acquaintances, began to pick sides in a war that hadn't even been declared out loud. Aunt Linda called again, this time sounding more panicked than passive. "Zach's having a hard time," she said, like she was talking about a dog with an upset stomach, not a grown man who'd weaponized my love and then played victim when it dried up. "He's always looked up to you, Kelly," she added, in a tone so insincere it made me wonder if she even believed it herself. I told her, flatly, that I was no longer involved in Zach's affairs, and I hoped she understood that I was not interested in reopening that chapter. She didn't take it well. She said I was cold. She said family didn't just walk away. But family, I wanted to scream, also doesn't treat you like a damn ATM with a guilt complex. I didn't scream, though. I just hung up, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and took Mabel for a long walk in the cold evening air, where the silence finally felt like something I could wear without shame. That night, lying in bed, I realized I hadn't cried once, not since the text, not since the cancellations, not since the first unpaid bill, and that absence of tears said more than any journal entry ever could. I wasn't mourning. I was adjusting. What hit me hardest in those quiet moments wasn't the loss of Zach, it was the recognition that I had been bracing for this break for years, and now that it was here, it felt like slipping into water that was cold, but survivable. I didn't miss the anxiety. I didn't miss the constant calculation of how much I could give without completely erasing myself. And I certainly didn't miss being invisible to someone who only remembered me when the bills were due. But if you think that was the end of it, if you think Zach took the hit, learned the lesson, and moved on, you don't know how men like him operate. They don't accept consequences. They rewrite the story. And the next time I heard from him, it wasn't a phone call, or a letter, or even a sincere apology. It was an ambush. A digital family meeting. And he brought back up. There's a particular kind of performance that only exists within families, one where people who haven't lifted a finger in your life for years suddenly appear with opinions, accusations, and carefully curated memories, ready to reframe history in a way that flatters their own passivity and buries your effort under a shallow layer of guilt masquerading as love. And when I logged into that unannounced Zoom call, sent from Aunt Linda's email without explanation or consent, what I saw wasn't a conversation but a staged ambush, a coordinated intervention led by people who had comfortably watched me carry everything for over a decade and now had the audacity to act shocked that I had finally dropped the weight. The screen loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, and as the faces settled into clarity, Zach's furrowed brow, Ashley's stiff posture, Aunt Linda's forced half-smile, I felt the kind of deep, Physiological exhaustion that doesn't come from sleepless nights, but from years of being expected to hold your breath so everyone else can breathe freely. I almost closed the laptop, and maybe I should have, but something in me, something stubborn and perhaps a little cruel, wanted to hear exactly what they thought they were going to accomplish. Because whatever speech they had prepared, whatever moral high ground they thought they were standing on, I knew they had already lost the only thing that had ever truly mattered in this dynamic, my cooperation. Aunt Linda started, her voice wrapped in that brittle warmth she always used when trying to sound maternal, despite having shown up for less than a handful of meaningful events in my life. "Kelly, sweetheart, we just wanted to talk, that's all," she said, as if I hadn't been ambushed, as if this wasn't a poorly disguised tribunal. "There's been confusion. Some pain. And I think it would help if we could all just clear the air." I didn't speak. I didn't nod. I just stared at the screen, waiting for the script to unfold. Zach, always eager to fill a silence when it wasn't on his terms, jumped in next. His voice was already simmering with practiced hurt, like he'd rehearsed the role of the wounded sibling all morning. "You really blindsided me, Kelly," he said, shaking his head with a disappointed expression so exaggerated it might have earned him a nomination if we were in a different kind of production. "I don't even care about the money, I care that you didn't even talk to me. You didn't give me a chance to explain." I almost laughed at that, the sheer irony of him wanting a conversation after sending a single sentence that ended with the words, "Don't bother coming," still fresh in my memory like a bruise that never quite faded. Ashley leaned into the frame next, her voice tense and clipped, as if she were trying to keep a lid on her own resentment, but didn't have the skill to manage it. "We were planning a special Christmas, Kelly," she said, as though my absence had ruined some Hallmark fantasy she'd crafted in her head. "And I just think it was really immature to pull financial support right before the holidays. If you had a problem, you should have said something like an adult." That line, "like an adult," hit me with a strange combination of humor and nausea, because nothing says adulthood like living off someone else's paycheck while simultaneously insulting them behind their back and assuming the money will still show up out of habit. Still, I said nothing. I let them talk. I let them squirm. I watched them recycle buzzwords like communication and emotional safety, their faces tightening with each second I refused to rescue them from their own discomfort. Aunt Linda tried again, her voice rising slightly, the smile cracking at the edges. "Kelly, we're just asking you to look at the bigger picture. Family isn't perfect. We all make mistakes. But you don't solve anything by ghosting your brother in the middle of a crisis." And there it was, that word. Crisis. As if the real emergency wasn't years of dependency and disrespect, but the moment I finally refused to pay for it. That was when I finally spoke. My voice was calm, not cold, but heavy, like the weight of a door being closed for good. "Did any of you, even once, thank me?" I asked. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so damn predictable. Zach blinked. Ashley looked down. Aunt Linda opened her mouth and then closed it again. "For 10 years," I continued, "I paid his rent, his tuition, his phone bill, his groceries. I bailed him out of parking tickets. I gave him rides at 2 in the morning. I covered his emergencies. I gave up vacations. I missed birthdays. And I never once asked for anything in return. Not even respect. But now that I've stopped, I'm the villain." Zach tried to jump in, something about how I made everything transactional, but I didn't let him. "I didn't stop loving you," I said, staring directly into the camera, my voice sharper now, controlled but cutting. "I stopped funding your delusion that you were doing all this on your own. And if that makes me a monster, fine. But don't rewrite history to make yourself the victim. Not when the only thing I ever did wrong was letting it go on for this long." Aunt Linda started to cry then, real or not, I couldn't tell, and honestly, I didn't care. Ashley turned off her camera, and Zach sat there, frozen, as if he still believed there was something he could say that would snap me back into the version of myself he preferred, the quiet benefactor, the invisible sister who made his life easy while he painted her as bitter behind her back. But that woman was gone. And I didn't mourn her. "I'm done," I said, softly this time, like a lullaby with teeth. Not angry. Not emotional. Just done. And then I clicked the little red button in the corner of the screen and ended the meeting. Just like that. The room was quiet after, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for music or distraction, because it has its own weight and rhythm. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't call a friend to vent or pour a glass of wine to numb the aftershock. I simply sat with it, this new shape of my life, this absence of noise and obligation and invisible expectations. And in that quiet, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. But of course, family stories don't end that easily. People like Zach don't just vanish after being exposed. They regroup. They reframe. They come back with new tactics, new angles, new ways to twist the knife. And sure enough, a few days later, just when I thought maybe the storm had passed, I got a voicemail. From Zach. Alone. Crying. Saying he'd lost everything. But I didn't call him back. And I didn't delete the message either. There's a moment that happens, usually quietly and without announcement, when the shape of your life changes in such a subtle, permanent way that you don't even realize you've crossed a threshold until you look back and realize there's no way to return to what was. It's not loud, not dramatic, not even particularly painful. It just is, like the light changing at the end of a long day, a slow shift in color and weight, and that's exactly what it felt like when I woke up on Christmas morning and didn't feel the usual sting of exclusion or the pang of guilt that used to follow me like a second skin, clinging to every breath, reminding me that I was always the one who stayed behind to keep things from falling apart. Instead, that morning was quiet. I woke up without an alarm, with sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor like honey, slow and golden, and for the first time in years, there was no rush to be anywhere, no countdown ticking in my head, no nagging voice whispering that I was late, or needed to check on something or someone or send money before a deadline. I brewed my coffee slowly, deliberately, enjoying the sound of it percolating in the silence of my kitchen, and I thought about how many years I had spent performing holidays like a duty, showing up with the right gifts, with a forced smile, pretending that I belonged in a room full of people who treated me like a tool, not a person, measuring my worth by what I could offer rather than who I was. This year, there was no tree, no family dinner, no dry turkey or awkward toasts or passive-aggressive comments about my love life or lack thereof. There was just me, my dog curled beside my feet, and the absence of obligation, which felt more like a gift than anything that had ever come wrapped in shiny paper and red ribbon. I had bought one present this year. Just one. And I had wrapped it myself, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to, an indulgent little act of self-recognition, a nod to the part of me that had always been last on my own list. It was a plane ticket. One way. To Hawaii. Not a fantasy. Not an escape. Just a decision. I had accumulated so much vacation time over the years that HR practically begged me to use it, and for once, I had nothing stopping me. No family member relying on me to keep their life upright. No excuses left. I opened the envelope slowly, not because I didn't remember what was inside, but because I wanted to mark the moment, to acknowledge that this, right here, was the beginning of something I hadn't had in years, time that belonged only to me. I had no idea what I'd do when I got there. I didn't plan tours or resorts or group activities. I just wanted to breathe somewhere warm, to sit in a place where no one knew my name or expected anything from me except perhaps the kindness of a passing nod. That, to me, was freedom. Around noon, my phone buzzed. One notification. A voicemail. No caller ID, but I knew who it was before I even touched the screen. My thumb hovered for a moment before I pressed play, and then his voice poured into the room like a draft through a door left ajar, weak, thin, broken in a way I had never heard before. Zach. Crying. Not angry, not manipulative, not even defensive. Just broken. He said he lost the apartment. That Ashley had moved out. That the university dropped him. That he couldn't get through to the loan office. That Aunt Linda was done helping. That he had nowhere else to go. Then came the line I wasn't ready for. You win, Kelly. I lost everything. I hope you're happy. And I just stood there, the phone still in my hand, the words hanging in the air like cigarette smoke that wouldn't dissipate, and for a second, a long, heavy second, I almost cried, not for him, but for the years I had spent believing that my worth was wrapped up in fixing things, in stepping in being the one who never walked away, no matter how badly I was treated. But I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just breathed, deep and slow, and realized I didn't feel the need to rush to his rescue anymore. Because this wasn't about winning or losing. It never had been. It was about choosing. And for the first time in my adult life, I had chosen me. Still, I didn't delete the voicemail. I didn't respond, but I didn't erase it either. I let it sit there, like a paperweight on the corner of a desk, a reminder that you can love someone, deeply, fully, and still decide to stop giving them the parts of yourself that they only take for granted. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't have to come with reunion. Sometimes, it's simply the quiet decision not to hate anymore. And that's enough. I walked out onto my balcony, still holding my coffee, the air brisk but clear, and watched the world go on without me, as it always had, as it always would. Somewhere across town, maybe Zach was sitting in a half-empty apartment. Maybe he was blaming me, or maybe, just maybe, he was realizing that love isn't a currency and kindness isn't a guarantee. Either way, it wasn't mine to solve anymore. And yet, because I'm still me, because I can't erase the instincts built into my bones, I left one small thing untouched. Just one. I hadn't canceled the very last tuition payment. It was still sitting in the system, unsent but queued, a single option left open like a door that wasn't quite locked, not because I hoped he'd come knocking, but because I wanted him to know that if he ever truly chose to stand on his own, without expectation, without arrogance, without assumption, there would be one more chance waiting on his own terms, not mine. But that decision would be his, and his alone. I was done deciding for him. As I turned to go back inside, the light caught the edge of the envelope on my coffee table, the ticket glinting beneath the wrapping, and I smiled, not because everything was perfect, not because I had all the answers, but because, finally, I had none of the weight. Let him feel the winter. I had a plane to catch.